So my buy out of that group is going to be Rachaad White. He has both an NFL-friendly and a fantasy-friendly skill set in that he is legitimately a good pass protector. He is a good pass catcher, and he is serviceable enough on the ground that all of a sudden he's like a weekly fantasy starter. I don't think we're like that far from that happening again. Very similar to like Rico Dowdle from last year. I think if a team that doesn't feel that great about their primary plan at running back were to add Rachaad White, we can very easily be in a world by October where he's getting more snaps than the incumbent.
The absolute easiest thing that I can envision that's going to work out really well for Rachaad White, by the way, is he just goes and plays with his old college teammate down in Washington, and they roll with a JCM Rachaad White backfield next year. I am not your host, Tom Tipple. Tom Tipple is under the weather, so pinch hitting for Tom in the host chair down from Sayulita, Mexico, in the eyes of the cartel, is Jakob Sanderson, joined, as always, by Ryan Heath. We have a fun episode today. We are going to discuss the running backs with the most to gain and the most to lose from the impending free agency and eventually the NFL draft. These are the running backs that you look up at Dynasty rankings in July and in August, and they might have changed 3, 4, 5 rounds from where they are now based on whether they get some good fortune in the wars to come. Starting that off, we're going to look at the higher value free agents. We're going to get down to some of the higher value incumbents, and we're going to look at some bargain bin pieces that when the dust settles might have a better chair when the music stops than people might think. So Ryan, why don't you lead it off, because you wanted to talk about the guy who made a lot of news this week, being the first domino to fall in free agency. We're going to do a buy, and we're going to do a sell for each of us in each of these categories. So for the high price free agents, Ryan, why are you buying Javonte Williams after he was confirmed to be extended by the Dallas Cowboys?
Yeah, so I'll just set up my approach to free agency and handling it in Dynasty before this, because I think it all is kind of informed by that. I hate trying to buy and sell on free agency stuff. To me, I don't consider it like an edge that I personally have in terms of guessing where guys are going to go, if they're going to fit well in any particular new place. It's just a lot of variance that I always feel I feel compelled to sit out or feel compelled to reduce the variance from free agency as much as possible when it comes to these running backs. So when we get a guy signing early like Javonte Williams, 3 years, $24 million with 16 guaranteed, assuming this is functionally like a 2-year deal, because 2/3 of it is guaranteed. When we get a guy like that, I become more attracted to it because it's a situation we've seen Javonte Williams score a bunch of fantasy points in. He was the RB7 by expected fantasy points per game last year, kind of in the low end RB1 range by actual fantasy points per game. And it's one of the better situations for a running back. The Cowboys are, at this point, one of the few offenses in the NFL that can kind of still get away with playing this 2020 era style of football where they are in a lot of 11 personnel, they're dropping back a ton, and it's because Dak Prescott's very good. CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens are very good. They are one of the few teams that can kind of outmatch this defensive revolution that's been happening the past couple of years, just bringing offensive production down. So yeah, to have Javonte be immune to that in a 2-year window where he's very likely going to score as a low-end RB1 is pretty appealing to me. Maybe the biggest criticism you can make of a player like Javonte is he's not promised 100% of the backfield, right? He was losing some receiving work down the stretch. I think in an ordinary year, even a Javonte with a new contract would be a player where you would say, well, anyone could come in and kind of steal off 40 to 50% of the workload here. Maybe they still don't like him as a pass catcher, even though he was having injuries down the stretch. I think that's all possible, but this is an incredibly weak and incredibly deep incredibly shallow running back draft class. There are not a lot of guys that would scare me in terms of if the Cowboys take a shot on late day 2, late day 3 that Javonte is going to have his job stolen or anything like that. I think you just kind of are getting what you see here, which is production for the next few years on a really good offense. And I think Javonte still kind of has that stink about him a little bit, where dynasty managers are not viewing him as like, oh, he's this premium untouchable asset. Like people are going to think that they're selling high on Javonte to you, which maybe they are, but I think you're okay to pay for that production personally.
And how much are you paying for that production?
I mean, for comparison, I guess, just to look at some guys that are around him on Dynasty Data Lab. Now, of course, he's going to go up from here because this is a positive landing spot and all that. But I mean, I would put him in the range of like a Kyron Williams, of a Cam Scadaboo, who we're going to talk about later on this show. I would take Javonte to those two guys straight up at this point. I would rather have my capital invested there. So, I mean, whatever that comes out to, if that's like, I'm going to guess pick valuations are weird this time of year, but anything after like the 105, I would gladly pay for Javonte. And I think that is it. I think that's at least somewhat realistic. Maybe you can disagree with me there.
Yeah, I mean, I would not be paying a first for him, but that's more of my philosophy about any of this group of running back. I wouldn't pay that for Kyron either. I think that the Kyron comp makes a ton of sense. They're basically the same age. Javonte came in as a super young prospect, which was what was so appealing about him way back in the day. And he's basically lost the upper gear to his game, but everything else seems to have come back. Like, he excelled as a tackle breaker last year, really consistent chunk runner. So I think comparing him to Kyron Williams makes a lot of sense. They're both guys that aren't really dynamic receivers, but they're trusted in pass protection, so they can accumulate some PPR production in spite of that lack of dynamism. And they're going to get the goal line work on their teams. They're probably going to get the bulk of carries on their teams. Maybe their team expels them on occasion with a more explosive element, but you don't ever feel like you're in danger of like an immediate flippening of the backfield. So I view them pretty similarly. I think how much you view like I would project him in the 14 to 15 point range of running back production on your dynasty team. Probably depends a lot on you and in your league. But that's probably where he's going to be. And he probably is as secure as some of those other guys that have just felt more secure for longer. So I don't see a problem with buying high there. If I'm going to buy one here, I mean, two of my favorite sons are on this list together. But looking at recent ADP, one still goes a decent bit above the other, which I think it should be reversed. So Ken Walker would be the guy that I'd be willing to buy. And I think he kind of wins no matter what here, in my view. I know some people were saying that Zach Charbonnet injury was bad for him because it was more likely to stay in Seattle. That was kind of my initial reaction. He then goes out and wins the Super Bowl MVP. My thoughts are this. If he leaves Seattle, right, and he might have priced himself out of Seattle. I bet teams around the league view him more highly after he had this unbelievable postseason run, carrying him all the way to Super Bowl MVP than they might have beforehand. And there's no doubt that Seattle probably views him more highly after he was so instrumental in doing that for them. So I think if he stays in Seattle, it's a huge win for them. In terms of he's going to be dealing with a hobbled Zach Charbonnet, who they won't be able to bring back probably until the midseason. I think he's going to see a far improved role than he saw for most of this past season, if not quite the playoff RB1 overall level role. Or he goes literally anywhere else in the NFL, where I think he's one of the most talented running backs in the game. And you're getting a team that paid him so much that Seattle wouldn't outbid him and intends to give him a ton of work. So I think he's in like a B+ spot in Seattle, given Charbonnet's now hurt, or he's in an A+ spot somewhere else. I'd be all in on him. And like, he is ranked currently, right in that same group as like the Scadaboo and the Kyron. I like him way more than those guys. I like him more than Saquon. I like him more than Judkins. I like him more than Hall. I like him more than Bucky Irving. I like him more than Chase Brown. I like him a lot more than pretty much several of the running backs ranked ahead of him.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd go quite as far as you are on a couple of those names, but it does ring at least somewhat true to me that I have like personal trepidation about Ken Walker for this upcoming season because he's hurt me so badly in the past, et cetera, et cetera. And I just get very annoyed by these running backs where so much of the evaluation is, oh, there's an injured teammate. How long will this last? Like, what's this going to turn into? All of that's just like very annoying to me. But yeah, with where he's priced right now in Dynasty, it's pretty hard to argue that I think most of like the downside there is just kind of accounted for. The fact that he's going below a lot of the names you just mentioned, the Kyron Williams, Saquon Barkley's, like these types of players, I would clearly rather have Walker. The upside is like if he lands in the A+ spot, I have no doubt that he can be a top 6 fantasy running back. So yeah, I think that is also a bet worth making right now.
I'll throw it back to you in this group of the higher priced free agents, that being Breece Hall, Ken Walker, Travis Etienne, and the newly minted Javonte Williams. Ryan, who of this group would you be looking to move off of on your Dynasty teams?
Yeah, I'd be looking to move off of Travis Etienne. So my thing here is what is actually a better landing spot for Etienne than the Jaguars? I think this is one where I think this, more than like a Ken Walker, more than like a Breece Hall, I think this is one where people have to talk themselves into like the best case scenario. But the best case scenario for Etienne, in my view, is like he remains in Jacksonville. He is he's an explosive runner. Etienne absolutely went out and proved me wrong about everything I thought about him this past season. So like taking my lumps there, back on the hater train, of course. But it's not like that I'm a hater. I don't hate Travis Etienne. I don't think he's bad. I think he's probably going to score a decent amount of fantasy points this year. My issue with him is the uncertainty that I was talking about earlier. I don't know how he projects in any other offense. We have seen that Liam Cohn is basically the running back production whisperer. He has gotten incredible production out of basically every running back he's gotten his hands on, guys like Rachaad White included. And now I'm not saying that like Travis Etienne isn't talented, that he's not very likely going to command like a top 3 deal at the position in free agency, anything like that. But I do think he's more environment sensitive than your average running back. He is a guy that really kind of benefits from when there are holes blocked for him, and he does very well seeing those and taking advantage of those. If you just split it out in the fantasy points data suite by yards, plays where he gets at least 1 yard before contact and plays where he's hit at or before the line of scrimmage, he's like a top 12 back in every efficiency metric when he has a bit of room to run. But it flips when he doesn't. He goes to like the back end of that group when he's hit at or behind the line of scrimmage. I don't know, similar kind of complaints or criticisms that people make about like Ken Walker. Oh, he gets hit in the backfield too much. Like that's kind of Travis Etienne a little bit too. So I just don't know that like any possible landing spot for him is good, or that like just volume is enough. And maybe you'll have opinions here, but I know you have talked about him potentially going to the Chiefs and that could be a good move for them to make. Is that like a running game that is conducive to Travis Etienne's success? Like, yeah, I think he's going to get a lot of volume there, but is that like the spot where all these holes are open for him and he's breaking off like a couple big runs a game? I just don't know if that really looks any better than it did in Jacksonville at the very least. So that's kind of where I'm at on Etienne. I just kind of think what we saw last year was like about the best you're going to get out of him in the NFL. And I think he is basically priced that way.
I didn't have him as my buy or my sell, and for 2 reasons. One, I really agree with a lot of what you said about him being environment sensitive. It reminds me now he's much better than Miles Sanders was when he was entering free agency. But some similarities to me from when Sanders was entering free agency off that excellent year with Philly, the year that they went to the Super Bowl and lost to the Chiefs, and Sanders had the 1,000-yard rushing season. He is a win more back to me, for the same reasons that you mentioned. He's a guy that is not going to be much of a creator at or around the line of scrimmage, but he's a guy that can add that extra home run hitting ability if you have an already successful play. And we saw Cohen, I think, use that ability to great effect on some end arounds, on some screens, etc. I like the Chiefs spot just for the reason that when you play with Patrick Mahomes, teams don't put dudes in the box. You're going to get a lot of 6-man boxes. You're going to get a lot of those wide open runways. You're not going to be hitting the backfield very frequently. And so to me, like, I think of a game like that the Chiefs played against the Bills in the regular season, where they were just voluntarily playing Kareem Hunt at running back, and the Bills were playing 6 defensive backs. They were playing in dime-based defense on 1st and 10, saying like, yeah, if you want to run Kareem Hunt, that's fine. We'll give you success rate. It will be 5 yards. And if you want to play the entire game of run Kareem Hunt 2nd and 5, run Kareem Hunt 3rd and 2, like, okay, eventually we'll get a holding penalty, or we'll get a sack, or a defensive tackle is just going to beat his guy and it's going to be 2nd and 12, or you'll throw a pick, or you'll get bored of this and you'll throw a pass and we'll have 6 defensive backs out there waiting for you. It's not a sustainable way to run in the NFL. And so I hope that the Chiefs eventually recognize this. And I think Etienne, while not being like, I think a great all-around running back, is a good fit for a situation like that, where what you want is a home run threat that forces defenses to play you a little bit differently. I think he'd be successful there. I also agree, though, if he's back in Jacksonville, it's a win. If he's on the Chiefs, I think it's a win. If he's several other different places, I'm not as sure that it's a win. And he's also 27. He came into the league older than any of these other 3 guys. He was a class older than 2 of these guys. So you have fewer of those prime years remaining. My sell, though, and I hope that I'm wrong, if things work out how I don't expect, I will change course on this in a month's time, happily. But my sell, less about the player and more about the price versus my expectations for the players, is Breece Hall. We just talked about these backs. Javonte, he's a Cowboy. Etienne, I think the 2 most likely spots based on what's been reported is that he's back with the Jaguars or he's on the Kansas City Chiefs. And we'll see where else he goes. Walker is on Seattle, which is not perfect, but I think with Charbonnet hurt is pretty decent. And the most likely spot for Breece Hall is the New York Jets. He seems the least likely of any of these guys to actually hit the open market. That's based on reporting that they're considering both the franchise tag or the transition tag, which is basically like a right of first refusal tag. I think we knew that the Jets had plans to keep him because this regime had the chance to take a 4th-round pick in 2026 from the Kansas City Chiefs at the deadline in a season that was going nowhere. They decided not to. If they let him walk, the only way they get a compensatory pick is, first off, they don't cancel out his money with other signings. So you don't just get a compensatory pick. If they sign someone else that cancels it out, they might get nothing for him if he walks. And because he's a running back and running backs don't make that much money, he would likely only qualify as like a 5th-round pick compensatory, and that would probably be in 2027. So I highly doubt that they just were happily turning their 26th 4th into a maybe 27 5th if they had no intentions to bring this guy back. So my view is if he's on the Jets this year, he's going to have some good games like he did last year. He's going to be a startable player in fantasy. You're still going to have a risk that he gets shut down at some point with some weird injury. You're going to have risk that the Jets play some goof knobber like Brady Cook in their last couple of games to lose games on purpose, and he ends up being pulled basically in the 3rd quarter of games because they're down by 40 points. You're still going to have to deal with Aaron Glenn punting on 4th and 1 when they're down 14 points in the 3rd quarter because he's a complete moron. And they're going to run like 42 plays per game in some of these games because they're incompetent. It's an awful operation. They got rid of the only guy I think on their offensive staff I had any respect for in Tanner Engstrand. So I don't want to be associated with the New York Jets. Part of my optimism last year with Breece Hall was maybe this goes better than I expect it to go from a coaching and scheme perspective, or maybe he gets traded. If he ends up stuck there on the tag, or especially on some sort of long-term deal they negotiate after using the leverage to tag him, I no longer have any hope in the staff, and I no longer have any hope that he would not be on this team. And so I would be pretty much out on him at his price until either his price changes or he ends up in a different uniform. I hope everything I said is wrong. I hope that he signs with the Commanders or the Cardinals or any other team, and I can be all in on Breece Hall. He's one of my favorite players in the NFL. But basically, he's the most expensive of the 4, and he's the one I think is the most likely to be trapped in hell.
Yeah, I'm going to be of a pretty similar mindset to you on Hall. I think it's maybe a little bit more likely than you do that they either allow him to hit the market or they try to do this weird in between like transition tag thing, which probably ultimately ends up with them either just signing him to an offer sheet or like matching another team's, or some team comes and blows them out with like this Godfather offer that would be more than the franchise tag that they just wouldn't match. Realistically, though, as you've pointed out, most of the time it seems like the transition tag is just kind of a dumb little like wage suppression collusion game that NFL owners like to play with each other. It's very rarely actually used in an adversarial way. Remembering back to the Lamar Jackson stuff a few years ago, which is even more ridiculous in hindsight. So yeah, most likely Hall's with the Jets. The way they used him last year was so enraging. I think it was probably around like week 12 when he like took a screen pass to the house, and I was like, it's been a while since I've seen Breece Hall do that. Are they like throwing screens to him at all? And I forget the exact number, but I went back and looked it up, and they had thrown like 5 to 6 screens to him the entire year, down from like 25 or some like much larger number in the previous few years. Like they just had no interest in maximizing the second most talented player on their offense. I hate the Jets. We should spend less time on them, but I'm with you. It's pretty tough to be optimistic about Hall. I totally get wanting to sell him on the exuberance of, maybe he goes somewhere else. I think, selling guys like him on hope does make a lot of sense to me. But yeah, I'm also with you in that if he re-signs and his ADP tanks 2 rounds, I'm probably just going to be buying again.
Yeah, sure. This is more about my guess for the next few weeks of developments, and maybe my guess is just wrong. I hope it is for Hall's sake. But yeah, if he does sign on the Jets, and especially if it's July, he's been tag mogged, and he decides, okay, fine, the only place I can get a 3-year deal is New York. I guess it's not so bad here. I'll take my 3-year, $36 million deal with the Jets, and everyone freaks out. And now he's RB19. That's where I'll buy, because like he's still a really talented player. He still had really good games last year. I don't think Aaron Glenn is going to be the coach forever, because he's like the worst coach ever, and eventually he'll get fired, and maybe they'll get a quarterback, and who knows. All right, let's move on to our next category, which is the fragile higher value incumbents. So these are all running backs who carry at least like the 112 of value or higher in Dynasty right now, but they seem to have some risk of turbulence in their backfield. Maybe some people are leaving and new people are coming in. Maybe they have some free agents on their team that may or may not be re-signed. This group includes Bucky Irving, RJ Harvey, Chase Brown, Cam Scatteraboo, DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai, the Bears duo, and Bhayshul Tuten. Ryan, who of this group, and of course it's a wide range of value between them, are you most excited to add to your Dynasty teams?
Yeah, so the biggest buy here for me is going to be Chase Brown. This is one we've crossed swords on before. As of today, I would take Chase Brown straight up over Breece Hall. I would take him straight up over Bucky Irving. I would even take him straight up over Travion Henderson right now. So when I finally update my running back ranking, sorry about that, folks. I will get it done as soon as I make some more progress on prospect modeling. Chase Brown is going to be like a fringe top 8, top 9 dynasty running back for me. The reason for that is he just kind of keeps proving our concerns about him incorrect. So the concern last offseason was, is he that talented? Is he going to get replaced? If he gets injured or things don't go perfectly, is another running back going to come in and steal the workload away? And a lot of those bad things did just kind of happen for the Bengals in 2025. Joe Burrow gets injured early in the season. They can't run the ball to save their lives, just kind of no matter what. Things were looking very, very bleak for a while there. Brown was legitimately losing work to Samaje Perine, on the ground for a handful of weeks there. But then eventually things turn around. Brown is breaking off explosive runs. He's doing stuff we know Chase Brown can do. Joe Burrow comes back and Brown is like a fantasy playoff hero. So just looking at the splits, in games with Joe Burrow active, Chase Brown averaged 19.4 fantasy points per game last year, 17.8 expected. Everything we have ever heard out of the Bengals is that they absolutely love this guy. That, as far as I'm aware, there has never been any sort of report that they want to move on from him or like aren't that impressed with him or anything. I think they really like him there. Like he was great in some of the advanced metrics. He was top 8 in missed tackles forced per touch this past season. And also very importantly, when P. Ryan missed a few games, they just handed Chase Brown the 90% snap share for a month, the same way that they did in 2024. So that is also now always on the table. They are clearly way more comfortable just running Chase Brown into the ground if they have to than like playing around these stupid little games with like we're always going to force like rolls and a committee into our backfield. So that's like some nice kind of just weekly, yearly upside that he can always walk into a situation like that for any given week. And it was reported about a month ago now that they are working on an extension, or at least that Brown's side would like an extension, which makes sense to me. Whatever he was, a 5th round pick, he doesn't make very much. Of course, he would want an extension after 3 years. I think the Bengals would probably be smart to give it to him. Like they have a good amount of cap space. Like if they just match like the Javonte Williams contract, that's not really ruining any of their plans. It's like locking them in a really good player where they clearly have not wanted to like put huge resources into the running back position. I think that this just like solves that problem for them for however long they want to sign him at like a very affordable price. So I think it's likely he gets extended is more what I'm saying. I would be a little surprised if they like let him walk into this year without an extension. Now this is the Bengals. This is the team, of course, that famously held out on T. Higgins forever, even on Jamar Chase for longer than they should have, if I'm remembering correctly. So I could be misreading this completely, but I do think the day the news breaks that Chase Brown got extended for 3 years and he's locked into one of the best fantasy situations for the foreseeable future, I think his dynasty ADP goes up. I think his redraft ADP goes up. I think people become like way more, oh yeah, Chase Brown really does just score a lot of fantasy points over and over and over. So that's where I'm at. Because right now he is behind a lot of those names I just mentioned, the Breece Halls, the Hendersons, the Bucky Irvings in ADP. I would easily take Brown to outscore all of those names in 2026. And I think we're going to get like certainty on his near future sooner than most of those names, aside from Hall, but we think that the certainty is going to be bad and negative.
Chase Brown is like my least favorite type of running back to deal with in Dynasty, in that I'm very unconvinced he's good as an NFL running back, but I am aware and convinced that he has very fantasy friendly traits as an NFL running back. And he's definitely not like bad. I think he's like probably just like a pure real life sense. I think he's like a top 18 to 25 level running back in my estimation, which is like good enough that in theory he should be a starter on a continual basis. But if a team came in and was like, we would like to upgrade the running back position and not have it be all about Chase Brown, I would never really argue with them about that. And it's terrifying for me to deal with these types of players because I tend to be very dubious of them, but I'm also very scared that if I fade them too hard, there's nothing stopping them from just going out and having like an 18-point fantasy season. I loved it when Chase Brown had not done any of this before and was like super, super cheap and was competing with Zach Moss, and you could just add him wherever you wanted. Those were glorious, glorious days. This like last year and a half of this Chase Brown roller coaster ride is infuriating to me. And it's like very hard to manage when to get on and when to get off. I guess I'm less certain or less optimistic than you are of his role in 26. So I'm probably not going out of my way to buy him now, but I'm not at the point where I'm like selling at all costs, because I'm definitely not certain that, he's going to get replaced. Mostly because if they extending Chase Brown is like not something I would do. I don't really understand the need to extend Chase Brown ahead of time, but I also don't think replacing Chase Brown is something that you really do in this year's class. Like, what are you going to do? It's like, I think every team that doesn't have an elite running back should make a call if Walker or Breece Hall gets available. But I don't know, signing a big money free agent running back doesn't seem like the Cincinnati Bengals kind of thing to do. I don't think that there's a running back in this class outside of Jeremiah Love who would come in and supplant Chase Brown. I think it would make not a lot of sense if the Bengals use their first round pick on Jeremiah Love. I haven't seen that rumored anywhere. So then, like, what would I do if I was the Bengals? Well, it's like, could you probably want another back that's better than Samaje Perine. But the question is, like, what do they do? Is the complement to Chase Brown Emmett Johnson to come in and be a pass down guy? Or is it Tyler Algier to come in and be a 150 carry guy? Or is it like they just sign another Samaje Perine guy, or literally Samaje Perine, to basically just play enough pass pro snaps to keep Brown healthy enough that he's fine? Like, I think what we've seen from Brown now in 2 years as a player is this paradox where if you play him in a 1A role where he's only getting about 55 to 65% of the touches, he's a very efficient running back, but he's more of an RB2 for fantasy. If you play him where he's getting 85% of the touches, he becomes an inefficient running back, but he's an RB1 for fantasy. So do the Bengals care about that? I don't know. It doesn't seem like they do a ton. And when Joe Burrow was there was enough that Chase Brown could still be at least a low-end RB1, even with Samaje Perine on the field. So I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion on him, but I definitely get the optimism for sure. My buy in this group was Bhayshul Tuten. And this is a risk, purely a risk of like a belief in the player and then a tea leaf reading. I thought coming off of their postseason that they would probably sign Travis Etienne in short order. He was like good enough for them, and I can quibble about the advanced stats, but usually NFL teams don't care about that. Usually if they have an incumbent who plays well and puts up yards and scores touchdowns, they bring them back. I would still say it's very plausible. Like, I would say it's like 25 to 30% chance Travis Etienne re-signs with the Jaguars. But most of what you read seems to be connecting him to other places. I haven't seen any rumors that they're considering placing the tag on him. It seems like they're going to let him go to open market. They might offer him a contract. It doesn't seem like they're trying to retain him at all costs. And if Etienne leaves, I'm super bullish on Tuten because I believe in him a ton as a player. I think if he was in this year's class, he would legitimately be my RB2 in this year's class. I was just spending some time charting out the 26 running backs versus 25. And I have like 10 guys in 2025 that I like better than any non-Jeremiah Love back in 2026. Tuten's certainly among those. And I highly doubt that if they get priced out on Etienne, they're going to turn around and sign Ken Walker to $15 million a year. So it's basically, if it comes down to me, if it's a battle of betting on Tuten, who right now is going in the RB30s range, versus a type of like Tyler Algier or a Rachaad White or J.K. Dobbins, or insert your favorite day 3 running back, late day 2 running back from this year's class, I'm happy to bet on that. I think he's a really good player. And if I'm not overcoming this big incumbency advantage this year, I'm willing to make the bet on him in a system that I think can make basically any running back, especially one with his explosive abilities, very fantasy productive. So I think it's a pure gamble, but it's one that I think has a chance to pay off in a pretty massive way, and I'm very in on.
Yeah, I like this, obviously. Also, a Bhayshul Tuten enjoyer myself. It just felt like a little... I kind of figured you'd pick this one, so I didn't. Was more my thought process. I think where he's priced on like the ADP aggregators is totally fair. What it's going to cost you to get him in leagues that are like super in our bubble is probably a lot higher. I have him in a ton of leagues. I am not looking to sell right now. I do think a lot of the people that have him probably aren't looking to sell, but yeah, that's definitely worth checking in on, I would say. I guess, like, how high would you go to okay, Jacob, you're in one league, you don't have a whole portfolio of Bhayshul Tuten like both of us do. You're in one league. what are you offering for him to acquire him? How are you approaching that type of deal, and how high would you go, I guess, to get him on your team?
Well, so let's put it this way. So right now on DDL, he's at RB26. That puts him behind. That puts him behind DeAndre Swift, Kyle Monangai, Jaylen Warren. I would easily trade any of those three running backs for him. In terms of receivers going the same round as him, we've got Xavier Worthy, Quentin Johnston, Michael Pittman, Cortland Sutton, Wan'Dale Robinson, Alec Pierce. I would trade any of those wide receivers for him. JJ McCarthy is on here. Michael Penix is on here. If there's a team that needed a quarterback, I would trade either of those quarterbacks for him. Malik Willis is on here. I would not trade Malik Willis for him. I like Malik Willis a lot more than those guys. If we're talking purely a pick, I mean, it's really hard for me to figure out how to value these 26 picks, because what I think of as being a late first of value is so far divorced from how I would grade first round players in this class. But I'll put it this way. I mean, if you need a running back and you have a team that is young, so you might not want to make your running back to some 1 year fix. You're a growing team. You've been tanking for a couple of years. So you want to take a bet on a player, and you were thinking, hey, I have 2 firsts in this year's class. Maybe with my 110, I'll grab one. Well, I would rather bet on, by the time we get there, certainly it might help, but I would rather make the bet on Bhayshul Tuten with your 201 or your 112 personally than I would make the bet on Emmett Johnson, Jonah Coleman if they go in round 3. If Jadarian Price is actually going to go in the late first or the early second, then he should be valued above Bhayshul. But if there's whoever these RB3, RB4 of the class is that go in the third round, even though they have the round better draft capital than Tuten in such a weak class, I would prefer Tuten straight up to those guys, and I'd sell those level of picks for him.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to think about it. In my modeling and stuff for running backs, those 4 names that you mentioned all come out above Tuten right now, but that's based off projected draft capital, right? And I think you can very easily make the argument that Tuten was in a very good and very deep running back class that probably had the effect of suppressing running back draft capital overall, and that if Jonah Coleman and Emmett Johnson and Jadarian Price were in last year's class, it's not even super clear to me that all 3 of them would have gone ahead of where Bhayshul Tuten and Cam Skadaboo went necessarily. So yeah, I think that's a totally reasonable way to think about it. That if you are sitting there I want to add a running back with my late first, I don't think Tuten is all that different of a bet. Of course, by then we'll know what the Jaguars did in free agency and everything. So maybe, I don't know, maybe by then the Tuten price is actually a lot higher and the train has left the station. But I think pre-free agency, just assuming the Jaguars aren't looking to spend up and make big moves at that kind of level, then I think that makes total sense. I can sign off on that.
I got into this with Sherman about, it was best ball, not dynasty, but
that's the next thing I was going to bring up. And
he was arguing about Tuten being a really bad, and I completely disagree with him. If they re-sign Etienne, obviously that sucks. His value would go down, but it's not like he would go to 0. His value right now, Bhayshul Tuten's RB26. Blake Corum is the RB28. I mean, I think Tuten's better than Corum as a player. And Blake Corum also has no chance to be his team's clear-cut RB1 without injury in the next couple of years. Kyron has a contract extension. The best Corum can really angle for is pulling into an even 50-50 timeshare with Kyron. That's his absolute apex. And then he's also an elite handcuff if Kyron ever gets hurt. And you also think, hey, maybe down the line, on his second contract, he could be a starter in LA or somewhere else. That would be the situation that Tuten would be in. So I don't think that any sort of ascension is actually priced in. I think he's priced basically the same as Corum is right now, which is what Tuten's situation would be if Etienne does get extended. So I think there's way more upside than there is downside at his current price. I don't think he falls off the face of the earth if Etienne does get re-signed.
I 100% agree in Dynasty. I think in best ball, it's a little bit of a different question because there's a chance he's just effectively a 0 for the year. Not actually, but I think it makes more sense in best ball to be wary of these guys that could turn into 0s just based on projected workload. But yeah, in Dynasty, he's still a good player. You can, we cope on these handcuffy guys for years until they like lose all dynasty value. So yeah, with you 100% there. Let's go a little bit more rapid fire to get through some of these other ones, but my sell for this group of these fragile incumbents is going to be Cam Skattebo. So this is not anything about Cam Skattebo as a player. As I've gotten more into running back modeling and like comparing these last few classes together, it really is continuing to jump out to me like just how fun of a fantasy prospect Cam Skattebo is and was. Obviously, he played great and scored a bunch of fantasy points for a stretch of this past year. I get why people like him. I get why people are excited. But right now, where he's valued in Dynasty as the RB15 on Dynasty Data Lab and Startup ADP, to me, that just has a lot of room to go down for a lot of different reasons over in like the short to medium term. So like we'll say like through October or November, right? I just think there are a lot of big pitfalls for Skattebo to be valued a lot lower than he is today. The biggest thing, of course, is the injury. He hurt his ankle, his fibula, and his deltoid. It's very like Chris Godwin, Tony Pollard, Mark Andrews-esque similar injury where it sounds like Skattebo is going to be on the field like for OTAs and such. Like he'll be around this summer. He'll be practicing and stuff. But all of the recent examples for this type of injury have been, they get back on the field the next season or maybe even a little ahead of schedule, but they are just nothing like themselves until the following season. Skattebo is younger than all of those examples I just listed. He's a really dynamic player, all that. So even if his recovery goes a little bit better than that, I think it's still a lot to expect him to be totally himself throughout the preseason with a new regime coming in when he is at least marginally going to be competing for snaps and touches. If he's himself before October, I'd be really happy and surprised. Also, something to consider is that the Giants had nobody to throw to at all for a lot of the games where he was doing all of this production as a receiver. Skattebo, I think, totally belongs as a receiving back in the NFL. I'm not saying it's going to go away, but was probably a little bit inflated by Malik Neighbors being out, and there just kind of being little else to throw to besides him and Wan'Dale Robinson. And just with the injury, with any potential setback that could happen with that, with him, the likelihood that he goes out on the field and doesn't look nearly as amazing like in September and people kind of panic and his value goes down. The cards flip over and it's more of a 60-40 or 55-45 split between him and Tyrone Tracy or another back because he's not going to be standing out so much in training camp. And just the fact that like I hate Matt Nagy and I have like a lot less faith that this whole thing in New York is going to work on like a macro level now. To me, just I would cash out on Skattebo. Like he's going in the same range as receivers like Luther Burden, T. Higgins, even running backs like Kyron, Ken Walker. I'm just going to prefer to Skattebo right now. I think this is like the type of move you make if you're like a very active dynasty manager that's kind of comfortable trying to like sell the highs and buy the lows, and like your league will trade with you and like give you that liquidity. If you're just like, I want good players on my dynasty roster, maybe don't sweat everything I just talked about. But I do think just like short to medium term, I'm a bit concerned.
Yeah, and I think that short to medium term is, why we're putting this out now ahead of the free agency, ahead of the draft. There's always room for the manager who I think just kind of believes in their guys and rides it out for better or for worse. But if you want to make some moves now and try to grind some edges, probably best to try and read some of the tea leaves. And that's really where my next sell comes in. I think this player is very similar in a lot of ways to Bhayshul Tuten, who I just propped up buying, but is much more expensive. He's currently going 3 full rounds, even a little bit higher than that, in dynasty startups ahead of Tuten, has higher draft capital than Tuten, but in my mind is probably just as likely to be in a 1B or timeshare role as Tuten is this season, and probably was less impressive to me in the rookie season. I'm talking about RJ Harvey, who I also really liked as a prospect. Going into Denver last season, he gets the trade up. They have the big draft capital there on him in the late 2. And he had a mixed rookie season. Scored a lot of touchdowns. That's good. I thought he continually made impressive plays in space. He had a couple of these massive runs where you saw the explosiveness, the missed tackle force stability. But I thought down to down really struggled as a runner with just vision and execution. And so it was very, very hit and miss. I thought where he showed his best work was in the receiving game, which is pretty important for a Sean Payton back, that I thought he was pretty consistently adept in that area. But we really saw when J.K. Dobbins went out that their whole approach to the run game shifted. They clearly didn't trust him or anyone else on their team to be that downhill runner. They didn't do anything under center with him. They wanted to kind of play spread ball. And most critically to me, even in their game against the Bills, which to their credit, they won, they have a fast running back on their team. They're playing a team that gets absolutely gashed by every single speed running back that they play. You could have just watched the tape from the previous week where Travis Etienne and Bhayshul Tuten ran for like 8 yards carry on them. And they gave Harvey like 7 carries, I think, in that game. And they gave McLaughlin 3 or 4. They basically didn't even try to establish a ground game there. They tried to use him out in space as a receiver, and he was successful in doing that. But that lack of confidence in him, whether misplaced or not, seemed to be very apparent. So going into this season, is that something they think that they're going to work on, that they're going to develop within him or not? I'm not sure. I can say that reading their beat reporter over on The Athletic this week, they were mentioning the possibility of signing Dobbins back. But when, ultimately he decided they didn't think they would sign J.K. Dobbins back. But he didn't say that was because they had a lot of faith in RJ Harvey. That was because he thought they might try to swing bigger at the position than J.K. Dobbins, who has these health concerns, was mentioning they might be a team that would consider signing Breece Hall. So I guess I would just be surprised if this team doesn't at least bring J.K. Dobbins back. And I think if they don't bring J.K. Dobbins back, you're looking at another back that could fulfill this sort of downhill role. We saw them give Sean Payton gave a coach speak tweet that they want to run more from under center this year. They didn't do any of that with Harvey. He didn't do any of that in college. To me, that screams, if not Dobbins, if not, sprinting for a Breece Hall, maybe it's, Tyler Algier coming in as that early down hammer. Maybe it's Jadarian Price, who Daniel Jeremiah was mocking to them in the first round, which would be completely insane, by the way. So I think with Harvey, there's just a lot of trust issues right now in terms of what he can be. It's a contending team that didn't trust him in a core area. If we get all the way through this period and into the summer, and RJ Harvey has a clean map to be a close to every down back, I'm going to be in, because I do think he can develop some of those deficiencies. I think he has very real strengths, and I think he's a good fit in some of the high upside stuff that Payton wants to do. But right now, I think he's being treated on the fringes of where it's likely that he is that starter. And I think there's a lot of hurdles in his way where he could wind up just being a situational piece by the time we get to the summer.
Yep, I called Harvey a sell on a show I did with Tom and Theo a week or two ago. You guys can go check that out on the channel as well for my thoughts. But we can keep it moving here into this fragile incumbent category. So these are guys that are much cheaper generally than the guys we just discussed, but same kind of deal. We know what team they're on, but there could be free agent signings, draft picks coming in, and we're going to pick a buy and a sell out of this group again. So this group is Jaylen Warren, Chuba Hubbard and Jonathan Brooks, Woody Marks, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, Jordan Mason, Trey Benson, Zach Charbonnet. So I'll start off with my buy out of this group, which is going to be Jaylen Warren. I would take Bhayshul Tuten over him, as you said earlier, Jacob, but kind of any of that other group of running backs, the Bears guys, Kyle Monangai, DeAndre Swift, that whole group of names that you discussed earlier, with the Quentin Johnsons, like all these wide receivers, I would just rather take Jaylen Warren out of most of those players. And the reason for this is we're officially at the point with Jaylen Warren where he's boring enough that he's not highly valued, but I still genuinely believe he's like a pretty solid player. This was kind of the thesis for him last year. is your average like late day 2 pick. I think Jaylen Warren is just going to be better than and is going to hold on to the job. That's pretty much what we saw happen. Of course, Caleb Johnson was an unmitigated disaster, so it wasn't like it was that close. But yeah, we just saw Jaylen Warren continue to be like the most trusted, most dependable option in that backfield. Kenneth Gainwell is now an unrestricted free agent. Arthur Smith also gone. So the things that were like annoying for him in terms of his usage oscillating each week and Gainwell randomly getting the 5 checkdowns instead of Warren for a lot of the weeks down the stretch, all of that should be gone. So we're just like right now, the default kind of situation is Jaylen Warren is just like at the top of this backfield by himself. Now I expect somebody else to mix in. Maybe it's Caleb Johnson. Maybe it is kind of like a B tier free agent signing, a Tyler Algier or something might make some sense to the Steelers, but whatever it is, including if it's a draft pick, which I think is less likely after they just invested in Caleb Johnson, I think that probably prevents them from going back to like the day 2 running back well so soon. But yeah, kind of regardless of what they do, I think Warren is in a really good spot to be the lead back. He was the goal line back last year. He was 10th in expected touchdowns ahead of guys like Chase Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Bijan Robinson, which was unbelievable to me, especially comparing the Steelers offense to some of those. So yeah, it's Jaylen Warren, guys. Like he literally finishes top 3 in all the like isolated tackle breaking running back metrics every single year. He did it again last year. He was a low end RB2 on a low end RB2 workload last year. I think that's probably towards like the lower end of his outcomes. I think it's entirely possible he's like closer to like a 65% workload type of running back where he's just like not losing some of these checkdowns. I don't have like I don't feel like I have a great finger on the pulse of like what the Steelers' plan for their offense and their backfield is this year. But I think whatever it is, based on like their realistic options and what makes sense to invest in, that Jaylen Warren is probably just going to be the best running back on the roster and is going to get the largest share of the touches. And anytime he does, he's going to produce up to that, is what we have pretty much seen. So yeah, I think Warren he's a nice kind of like sneaky, boring type of buy. It's not sexy. But this is one to me where like a couple things break right and you just got nice like weekly production for very cheap.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what happens for them the rest of the season. I had wrote about in the preseason that I expected them to be one of the highest XFP backfields in the league, despite them probably not being a very good team, just because they had like no secondary receiving options. And Arthur Smith loves to run the ball a lot, and Aaron Rodgers is terrified of contact, so he likes to throw the ball to running backs a lot these days. I did not anticipate that Kenny Gainwell would be the one that would be the recipient of like 40% of that XFP. I envisioned, frankly, Caleb Johnson being more in the Jaylen Warren role and Jaylen Warren being more in the Kenny Gainwell role. But nonetheless, I think the Gainwell stuff was so annoying because he wasn't drafted by anyone in seasonal leagues that it really overshadowed how good of a season Warren had. Warren still had 13.6 points per game. There's like a thing in fantasy circles where I feel like managers would almost rather have a running back who scores 12 points per game with the backup scoring 2 than have a running back who scores 14 points per game when their backup scores 12. It's kind of a scarcity mindset. And so the Steelers backfield sort of had Warren managers on tilt a lot, even though he was actually pretty productive. I think my interest in him comes down to, in some respect, how much Rodgers stays and then what they do with Gainwell. I don't think Mike McCarthy I think he's a better coach than Arthur Smith, but I don't think he's quite as running back friendly. And especially if they go ahead and trade for or add a secondary wide receiver, I'm not sure we'll have all of the ingredients for them to support quite as much total running back production. And so if that doesn't come to pass, I need Gainwell the fuck out of there. I need Rodgers and his Gainwell fetish out of there. And I need Warren to just be the workhorse back. Or I need all of that to just stay, and then Warren can have a 60% opportunity share, and I don't care because there's going to be running back plans aplenty. Overall, I like his price. My guy here was Chuba Hubbard. I think he's maybe even a little overvalued in Dynasty. I like him more in seasonal, mostly because everybody seems to hate him now. I don't view him quite as negatively. I was out on him last year as a redraft bet because I just thought he was kind of the classic dead zone guy last year. I'm more interested this year at a cheaper price tag because I think people are too excited about Jonathan Brooks for my taste. This was a prospect that I always thought was a little on the overrated side in a class that was really bad, similar to this one. But honestly, who cares about that at this point? The more pertinent aspect to me is this is a guy who has torn his ACL twice in 2 years. Has he had 3 total? Because I think he also had issues in college with injuries. Like, I just have like no faith at all that this guy is medically anywhere close to being peak health or will ever be able to recover. I would love to see it. Just like a fan of human achievement. But I also think Brooks is, one, probably not going to be very good. And 2, between the investment they have in Jonathan Brooks and the newer investment they just had in Trevor Etienne, I don't think this team is very likely to make a major investment at the running back position this season. And again, outside of Hall, Walker, Etienne, there aren't very many major investments to be made. I guess Jeremiah Love would be the other guy you'd put in that category. I think every other running back in this class is someone I'm not particularly afraid of. And every free agent beyond those top 3 is someone I'm not particularly afraid of. So I think the most likely scenario is that Chuba Hubbard, who was a really high quality runner for 2 years in a row before last year, who put up a bunch of terrible advanced stats, but he came back too soon off a calf injury because Rico Dowdle turned into Adrian Peterson for a month, but then was basically normal Chuba Hubbard again towards the end of the season, won back his job by the wildcard round. I think the most likely scenario is he's just their starter, and between Jonathan Brooks and Trevor Etienne and whoever else they might add are kind of fumbling around for what's left. And if Jonathan Brooks shows them enough, then maybe he's their guy in 2027 when they can get off of Hubbard's contract very easily. And if he doesn't show enough to be their guy, that's probably when they make their next major running back investment is 2027. But I think all signs for this year point to it just being Chuba Hubbard RB2 season. And I think he's one of the cheaper available ones of that ilk. I'm not very excited about it, but of the guys in this group, he's probably my favorite.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. I talked up Brooks as a buy a couple of weeks ago. I believe on the same show I was calling RJ Harvey a sell. But it's like for similar reasons. I understand you have like less particular belief in Brooks, but I think if you do have belief in Brooks as a talent, as a prospect, like his price is also totally reasonable. It's kind of a similar totally case where the Panthers are, I think we've seen, if nothing else, that Dave Canales and the Panthers are running a meritocracy in their backfield. Like they were totally willing to flip to Dowdle when he was playing better and when Hubbard was injured. I think you can envision a similar thing happening with Brooks, or if you're a Trevor Etienne believer, sure. So I just want pieces of this backfield is kind of where I'm at. So yeah, I mostly in alignment, but I'll give Brooks the time of day as well. In terms of selling this group, I think it's, first I'll say, very hard to sell guys in this group. I don't think people generally want to buy guys in this group very often. But like if I'm picking one, and my process for this is literally just who do I think is least likely to have a job 6 months from now, and also who am I the least scared of missing out on if he does in fact have a job 6 months from now. That's easily just Woody Marks to me. Even if you told me like Marks is going to have the same type of season, the same type of workload as like the back half of last year, it just wasn't enough to really matter in fantasy. He, compared to his workload, he was 3.5 fantasy points per game below his volume-based expectation from week 10 on. Obviously, a lot of this is just the Texans' offense and everything that's wrong with it, and the offensive line, et cetera, et cetera. But nothing that Mark showed to me was like, oh, he is a super talented running back in the league that is going to hold on to work over literally any other option that comes by. Jawar Jordan literally looked better in at least that one game where he came in and played for a good amount. Like, yeah, and Jawar Jordan is like meme tier, almost like Devi tier, like dynasty, like freak name that I couldn't believe popped back up a a year or a year and a half later or whatever it was after he was in that draft class. Like it's a literal who can come in and look way better than him. That just scares me off. Like the upside is like low end RB2 at absolute best in this situation. He was outperformed by Nick Chubb in basically every metric that is meant to like isolate running back play as well. So yeah, I am just, I'll take whatever for Woody Marks. I'll take like any second round pick pretty much. I'm fine just getting off him. But I don't know if you're even getting that. I don't know if people,
you're getting that or not.
Motivated to pay it.
But like, Woody Marks is pretty easily the least impressive rookie to have earned a starting job in their rookie year that I've maybe ever seen. I'm trying to think of other examples of like rookies who like had a clear replace me sign around their neck and just kind of wound up. Like Buck Allen would be one that comes to mind. Same school, I believe, and similar names, like similar name vibe where his name was like Javorius, but he had another name Buck. This was Jaquavius. He was Woody. Maybe they could have like a buddy cop movie, but I have no faith in Woody Marks. I don't think the one thing I think Woody Marks is actually good at is pass catching, and somehow they like use him as like a between the tackles grinder, which he's terrible at. I don't think he is in their plans. I don't know what their plan was last year. They clearly had way too much optimism in Joe Mixon returning to form, and then their like plan to replace him was to get like a overdraft a pass catching back and to sign like completely cooked Nick Chubb. I don't know. It wasn't a good plan. I assume we'll have a new plan this year. My guy, I mean, again, you can't really sell any of these guys, but my plan would be to sell Trey Benson, not today. I think James Conner, I think is going to get cut. So if you don't think he's going to get cut, maybe then maybe you sell Benson like immediately. But I do think James Conner is going to get cut. And I think we might have an interesting sell window on Trey Benson, who people still believe in. He's RB29 on Dynasty's Data Lab right now, going ahead of Ramondre Stevenson, Chuba Hubbard, Rico Dowdle, Tyler Algier, Zach Charbonnet, all these guys. I liked Trey Benson as a prospect. I had him ranked even above Jonathan Brooks as a prospect. I still like kind of believe that if he gets a chance to play football, that he would be good at it. To be honest, it's been 2 years. This guy's played basically no football. He is like 2 games from Marshawn Lloyd zone for me. And they now have a new regime in charge. I know it's the same GM, but it's a new coach. It's going to be a new offensive coordinator. Nobody that drafted him is around except for the GM, who's, I think, going to probably give the new coach, who's an offensive coach, a decent amount of say on who he wants to be the running back in his system. They're rumored as to be a team that's incredibly interested in Breece Hall if he were to be able to come available. I think they're going to be a team that's very interested in basically any running back. I just don't see it being plausible that, one, they retain, James Conner at like 32 for a rebuilding team coming off a massive injury, and that they then just go into the season and are like, yeah, this 3rd round pick from the previous regime who has never finished a game healthy in his NFL career, that's our feature back. That's our only plan at offense. Like that seems incomprehensible to me. So I think best case for Benson is that he gets a legitimate shot to start, paired with one of these lower level free agents like a Dowdle, an Algier, a Dobbins, a whoever, and or another round 3, round 4 rookie back. And, if that's the case and he's priced appropriately, I might bet on him to win that battle. I don't want to bet on his health because his health has been a problem forever, but I could bet on his talent. But I think that if Conner gets cut and there's a window of time where it looks like he is going to be their guy, he might rise even a round from here. Like, he's currently only going 8 picks behind Bhayshul Tuten, who I have way more confidence in, both from a role perspective and a talent perspective. He could jump a guy like Tuten. He could be up in that range. And I think there's like a decent chance he's just like an answer to a trivia question in a couple of years because he's never played football.
Yeah, no, I think it makes a ton of sense. I've famously been on the Trey Benson roller coaster just as soon as I could envision the starting role, and we saw it for a week and whatever. That was then and this is now. I pretty much line up with your perspective. I think is a lot more fragile in going into an off season than people maybe perceive. So let's get to our last kind of segment here. out of all of like the really, really cheap running backs that are either free agents or we could see them on the move, they're cut candidates. We're each just going to pick a buy because, again, you
Who's
don't
buying
really sell
these
these guys. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is, we're bargain bin hunting right now. But we each have a guy from this group we feel pretty good about as a buy. So the names that we came up with to choose from were Aaron Jones, Tony Pollard, Alvin Kamara, James Conner, David Montgomery, J.K. Dobbins, Tyler Algier, Rico Dowdle, Rashad White, Kenny Gainwell. So my buy out of that group is going to be Rashad White. I think it's hilarious that we've come around to this spot, but it has now been long enough that I guess the dynasty market doesn't remember that Rashad White is entirely capable of falling into a featured role. I don't think any team is ever going to go into a season with like Rashad White as the featured back being like their plan or anything like that. But he has both an NFL friendly and a fantasy friendly skill set in that he is legitimately a good pass protector. He is a good pass catcher. And he is serviceable enough on the ground that if he's on a team that is either forced to give him carries because of injury or what have you, or if it's a team that just philosophically doesn't care that much about the efficiency of their running back, then you can see Rashad White in like a 50+% snap role. All of a sudden, he's like a weekly fantasy starter. I don't think we're like that far from that happening again. He just very similar to like Rico Dowdle from last year. I think if a team that doesn't feel that great about their primary plan at running back were to add Rashad White to their backfield, we can very easily be in a world by October where he's getting more snaps than the incumbent and things just kind of flip to him just based on how an offense needs to operate. So yeah, nobody wants Rashad White. It's very gross. I get it. But yeah, if I'm adding like lottery tickets or I'm just like throwing guys into deals, Rashad White is somebody that I would love to have on a roster ahead of free agency because there are just with how shallow this running back class is in the draft, there are so many teams that could benefit from adding a Rashad White to their backfield. Like that can totally be a team's plan rather than spending an early day 3 or a late day 2 pick is just to add Rashad White, stabilize our offense on passing downs at the very least. He can mix in as a runner if needed. Like that is attractive to me compared to a lot of the guys that are kind of around him that I think it's like harder to envision them like worming their way into a role.
The absolute easiest thing that I can envision that's going to work out really well for Rashad White, by the way, is he just goes and plays with his old college teammate down in Washington, and they roll with a JCM Rashad White backfield next year. And you just have, it's honestly, like, I actually think in the NFL sense, it's actually a pretty good pairing. You have one running back who can actually give you some explosive running and nothing else. And then you have another running back who gives you some goal line size, and he gives you pass blocking, and he gives you receiving value. And that to me is like the perfect scenario for Rashad White to end up in, is if he can come in next to like an unproven but nominal starter who's basically a rush only guy, then I think you're just in such a good spot for fantasy, because at worst, you're going to get a flex-worthy timeshare role. At best, you get an injury or the other guy doesn't prove himself to be very effective. And so they go, well, if we're not getting efficiency with, the guy who can't do anything else, why don't we at least just get the same guy on the field all the time and get reliability? We've been on quite a roller coaster ride with my guy Rashad White, because I loved him coming out as a rookie for exactly this reason. Basically, I was like, he's big and he catches passes really well and he pass protects really well. And I don't really know if he is an efficient runner at all, but who's to say? And at the very least, he's got the super fantasy friendly skill set. And then he fell into that role and he was awesome. And then everyone decided that he should also be a feature back because he was a fantasy friendly back. And that's when I decided to hate him, because I was like, no, this guy actually stinks at running the football. He shouldn't be a feature back in the NFL. And then now we're back full circle where I get to be in on Rachaad White again because, yeah, he's now probably going to be this fantasy-friendly backup who's priced at his absolute floor, which is chipping in RB3 production as a receiving back with this massive ceiling in the case of injury or some unproven scrub doesn't do his job, and so he has to step in. I would love. Like, I don't think a team is going to make, you said this, I don't think a team is going to come out of free agency. They're going to be like, our starting running back is Rachaad White. That's our plan A. But it's so easy to see, like, the Cardinals are like, we'll give Trey Benson a shot, but we also signed Rachaad White. Or the Commanders are giving JCM a chance, but we also signed Rachaad White. Whoever drafts Jadarian Price pairs him with Rachaad White, something like that. It's pretty exciting. My guy here, and I love your White call, was Tony Pollard, just because all these guys are kind of grouped together. He's the guy. It was kind of assumed for a while the Titans might cut him. I don't think they're going to cut him. They would save them $7 million to cut him. We just saw Javonte Williams costs $8. The Titans, I don't think they're going to draft Jeremiah Love in the top 5. God help them. So that basically means, are you signing Travis Etienne, Breece Hall, or Ken Walker? Because if you're not, I don't see any running back out there in the draft or free agency that is worth cutting Tony Pollard for. Like, cutting Tony Pollard for what? Tyler Algier? You're going to have to pay him $7 million too, probably. And I don't think he's materially better. So I think the most likely scenario is that they smartly upgrade everything else about their team. Their shitty pass rush and their brutal secondary and their crappy wide receiver room. And all of a sudden we get to see year 2 Cam Ward with Brian Dable and a pretty decent offensive line, actually, with some good pieces, and hopefully an improved receiver room and defense and culture. And you get Tony Pollard, who quietly kind of balled at the end of last season. He was fantastic, really, in 2024, and he played really good ball at the end of 2025. And I'm willing to say that most of his inefficiency for previous parts of 2025 was due to playing in this completely non-functioning offense. So do I think we're ever going to see 2022 Tony Pollard again? No. Do I think he is still like a league average-ish starting running back? I think probably yes. And I think Tyjae Spears is kind of in the Trey Benson camp of, I still think this guy can play ball, but I don't have any confidence in his body to play more than 8 carries of football for more than 4 games at a time. So I think we're probably looking at Tony Pollard reprising his 280 touches on an offense that I think should be like the 21st best offense in the NFL this year instead of like the absolute worst.
Yeah, I love this. Yeah, I follow a lot of just Titans beat writers for whatever reason, and at least the previous regime was obsessed with Tony Pollard. They saw him as like the best player on their offense. Like he is very, very beloved in Tennessee. Is what I get. He balled at the end of the year, as you said, and it's just not a team where adding a running back should be a priority if they're making it like intelligent roster building decisions. I think Pollard is totally adequate or even good in terms of we need to develop and evaluate Cam Ward and all of that. There are so many other places that their attention and their resources should be going. I also hate like talking myself into these types of guys. That was a big mistake I made last year, was talking myself into Jets, talking myself into Titans, like into just these like bottom 5 like win total teams. But I do think at least with where Pollard's priced in Dynasty right now, that there's just kind of no downside to this. So I love that. Is there anything else we got to hit before we get out of here, Jacob? I think we gave the people a nice little guide to kind of navigating free agency or league market right now with all these running backs. Anything else to add, or are we going to sign off right now?
We'll sign off right away. Make sure to subscribe to our channel. Make sure to subscribe to the Fantasy Points data suite. Make sure to subscribe to Thinking About Thinking. I'm going to have a post talking about almost all of these guys up in the next few days. I'm going to be writing something on the running backs with the most to gain and lose in free agency. So if you want more of my thoughts on some of the guys we didn't talk about today, those will be in there. And that's all I got from me. Anything else from you? Otherwise, have a lovely day, everybody.